Now, his rise was rapid. His fall could be even swifter. Austria's leader quits after being accused of corruption and the foreign minister takes over. But is the country's youngest ever chancellor still calling the shots? I'm Maria Ramos, and today's newsmaker is Sebastian Kurz. Richard Nixon, Nawaz Sharif and Jacob Zuma, all world leaders brought down after being caught up in corruption. Now, Austria's Sebastian Kurz might be facing a similar fate. Last Wednesday, prosecutors raided his Conservative People's Party headquarters as the young chancellor became the target of a corruption inquiry. Now, the pressure on Austria's leader has been immense. Calls for him to resign were getting louder by the day, with even his own coalition partners urging him to quit.
Such a person is no longer capable of performing his duties. And of course, the People's Party has a responsibility here to nominate someone who is beyond reproach to lead this government.
But for days, Chancellor Kurz remained defiant, refusing to resign. But the prospect of a no-confidence vote forced his hand. And on Saturday, the once golden boy of Austrian politics announced that he was stepping down for the sake of his country.
In this
difficult time, it should never be about personal or party interests or political tactics, because my country is more important to me than myself. And what we need now are stable conditions. I would therefore like to make way in order to end the stalemate, to prevent chaos and to ensure stability.
So what exactly is Sebastian Kurz accused of? Well, essentially, he's alleged to have used public funds for his own political gain. Kurz, as well as several of his closest associates, are thought to have used taxpayer money to pay for manipulated opinion polls and bribe a well-known tabloid for favourable media coverage, all in an attempt to secure his rise to party leader and then chancellor. Now, Kurz maintains that he's done nothing wrong, and despite stepping down, he's vowed to clear his name.
You have all, over the last couple of days, followed that there are criminal accusations against me. Those accusations stem back to the year 2016. They are not true, and I will be able to clear things up, if I am very much certain.
The allegations against Kurz are serious, and if found guilty, he could spend time behind bars. And in a moment, we'll discuss what his resignation could mean for the country. But first, let's take a look at his rise to the top. Well, Kurz first entered politics in 2003, joining Austria's Young People's Party. By 2008, he was the chairperson. 3 years later, he was appointed State Secretary of the Interior for Integration. And then, in 2013, Kurz rose to the role of Foreign Minister. But his rapid advance wasn't over. And in 2017, at just 31 years old, Kurz became the Austrian Chancellor. But his leadership wasn't without controversy, and his close alliance to the far right was clear in some of his policies, particularly when it came to Muslims. In June 2018, Kurz announced that his government was shutting down 7 mosques and expelling 60 imams. 18 months later, Austria said it was setting up a new centre to document what it called political Islam. Critics claim it was just another attempt to unfairly target the Muslim community. And then in May this year, the government released its controversial national map of Islam, which actually placed signs across the country warning of mosques that the government said constituted an alleged threat. Now, these policies may have been heavily criticised, but they were also welcomed by a significant number of Austrians who may not have wanted to see the youthful chancellor go. Now, while Kurz has stepped down, his political career is by no means over. Alexander Schallenberg, who was sworn in as chancellor on Monday, said he would be working closely with his predecessor.
Und damit ich eines And let me make one thing quite clear right at the beginning. I will of course work very closely with Sebastian Kurz, the chairman of the New People's Party, the largest party in parliament, under whom the People's Party has successfully defeated 2 national council elections. Anything else would be absurd in terms of democratic politics. Moreover, I consider the accusations in the room to be false, and am convinced that at the end of the day, it will turn out that there was nothing to them.
So what does Kurz's resignation really mean for Austria? To discuss that now, I'm joined from Vienna by Judith Grohmann. She's a journalist and author of Sebastian Kurz, the official biography. Reinhard Heinisch is in Salzburg, and he's a professor of comparative Austrian politics at the University of Salzburg. And he's also written extensively on populism in Europe. And in Izmir is Austrian journalist and political analyst Klaus Jurgens. All right, we're going to kick off by speaking to you first, Judith. Help us understand what exactly is this scandal about, and will Sebastian Kurz end up behind bars?
We hope that he will not end up behind bars. He was a wonderful chancellor. He's a very good politician. And it's up to the judges to see what has really happened.
Reinhard, what do you think is this scandal about, and do you think he'll end up behind bars?
Yeah, that's an open question, but I think we need to distinguish. There is a legal dimension, there's a political dimension, there's a moral dimension. And while the legal dimension will probably take years to sort out, there's clearly a moral and a political dimension, which is what prompted his resignation, because the pressure simply seemed to be getting too large. We have to remember there are text messages that the police downloaded, and based on which that have come to light, there are thousands of them, and they're including messages where courts responded to messages by other people, and they essentially reveal a state of corruption, at least of political corruption, that is really beyond comparison in Austrian history, at least documented at this level. And I think it is that has prompted his own party to force him to step aside, or at least to step down as chancellor. One should add that several of these revelations show that he purposefully damaged his own party in order for personal ambition, and he also sabotaged national policy for personal ambition. And that is something he has to explain, and he has so far not yet apologized. And as a result, I think that there was too much heat, and his party didn't want to take the heat for an individual.
So do you think that, I'll put that question to Klaus, that's why he eventually gave input, because for a long time he was saying that he's not going anywhere. Do you think that is what forced his hand, Klaus?
Well, I think we have to see 2 dimensions here. I think the legal dimension, of course, I would leave, as my esteemed colleague just said, to the legal system. I would like to focus on the political dimension, and I am shell-shocked by someone who set out to change the Austrian political system, which was somehow old-fashioned, and there was no change, and 2 parties ran everything. He said there must be a new wind, a new dimension. I went as a journalist to his final big convention. It was American style with huge screens on top of it, almost like a Disney show in retrospect, with all modesty. And the German CSU came over and said, yes, now we have a new conservative dimension in Austria. Everything will change, and nothing has changed. I'm very disappointed. I think it would be hilarious if he comes back from his position in Parliament, in the Nationalrat, and for a 3rd time takes over the chancellorship.
That could happen, couldn't it? Sorry to interrupt.
Today said.
Klaus, sorry to interrupt, but that could happen, couldn't it? He could come back.
That could happen legally. Yes, Maria. Yes. Legally, it could happen, absolutely, if he is cleared of all charges, Mr. Teflon, one more time, and nothing sticks. Technically speaking, if he finds a majority in Parliament once more, he could become Chancellor again. Yes, indeed.
And what do you make of that, Judith? I mean, you're someone that has written about Sebastian Kurz, a biography. Will he come back again? Will we see a third chance? Yeah, there you have his book. Yes. So when you hear that, Klauss,
I had to show it.
You had to show it. When you hear that Klauss is shell-shocked, what do you make of that? And do you think that he will come back for a third time?
To be honest, I'm not shell-shocked, because looking at many parties, political parties, I would say I don't know if they are all so wonderful as they tell us when they are on TV or giving interviews, you know? I mean, corruption, we have heard about that around the globe. That's not only a typical Austrian phenomenon. And the second thing I would like to say is we don't know anything for the moment. And I think at the end, it will not be as some people might think. That's what I want to say. Very diplomatic, I think.
Judith, I'm just going to read to you what an influential Vienna newspaper said, Der Standard. It said that Kurz had demonstrated that he was very clearly morally flawed, adding that for a great many people in his country, Kurz is no longer tenable, but also no longer acceptable. What do you make of that, as someone that has written extensively about the ex-chancellor?
I know the newspaper, The Standard. I wrote my thesis about The Standard, so I know quite some people there. But to say something about that, let's see what happens in the next month. And let's wait a little bit. Let's drink a cup of tea and a cup of coffee and wait.
Okay.
I don't think that it is true.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Reinhard, where do you sit? I mean, we've got Klauss there, shell-shocked. Judith, wait and see approach. Take a cup of tea and wait. You're my third guest. What do you think? Do you think he can save his reputation and come back from all of this?
Sure.
That question to you, Reinhard.
Yeah, first, in politics, as we know, we can never say never. That's simply impossible. And in Austria now, the country has averaged major scandals every 2 or 3 years. And there are different paths that courts could conceivably take to come back. But we also have to remember this is quite special. This is quite different on a scale. And moreover, the investigation is not over. So every day we receive there are new leaks from these intimate chats between Kurz and his confidants. And there's not just a legal question, but it's a political question. Also, Austria has a president that has the prerogative of appoint a person as chancellor. And he's quite clearly stated that the person he would consider appointing is a person who is above reproach and not under investigation. The situation legally looks like he will be under investigation for at least some time, and it's hard to see that that there wouldn't be elections before the investigation is over. So in the long run, and if Kurz is cleared and somehow all these incriminating chats are explained away, and his own party reconciles himself with him, there's certainly a path back. But I wouldn't hold my breath, and I wouldn't assume this will be tomorrow. And at the moment, the country is clearly reeling, and he bears the responsibility for thrusting the country into another political crisis.
And to you, Klauss, he is still going to be there in Parliament, sitting in Parliament as head of his party. So how much power will he be wielding behind the scenes, Klauss?
I think there is growing discontent even in his own party. Where I spend, when I'm in Austria, most of my time is in a very conservative part of the country, in Tyrol. Now, you do hear comments, they say, we need a leader at the helm of the Conservative Party, the New People's Party, that actually is admired in the population, but is trusted too, in particular in a post-pandemic era. As I've said, as you've asked, legally, technically speaking, he can come back. Will he have the backing amidst the older generation, the really powerful people in his own party? I'm not so sure. And second, if I may, half a minute, it all boils down to the Greens. Will the Greens at one point wake up and say, look, we are a party of change? That's what they declared in Germany, waiting for coalition talks. Will they ultimately pull the plug and say, we risk it with not only someone else, but with a completely different party political scenario in order to survive, should something stick with Mr. Kurz, Chancellor Kurz? So I'm very interested to see how the Greens will develop. Will they simply stay and cling on and hope for the best? Or will they say, at one point, we must make our voice heard and say, it's not only about Sebastian Kurz, it is about a perhaps, I say perhaps, I'm not a lawyer, corrupt legal approach using the media, using media spokespeople to influence developments unfairly, which I think, in all honesty, Kurz should have never done. He would not have needed it. There was a time he was so much welcome amongst the Austrian electorate. Maybe his advisors, I'm not saying he himself, but maybe his spin doctors, maybe someone gambled it all away.
That's an interesting point. Did he even need it, to increase his popularity in the media? To you, Reinhard, what happens now to the coalition? Klauss has been talking about the Greens. We know the Greens had said he wasn't fit to govern. What happens now to the coalition? Does it continue? Can it be saved?
Well, the principle, I think it will be saved in the medium term because no one really has an interest in elections. The opposition parties are not prepared for elections except for the far right. The Greens need to run on an agenda, but even the Conservatives, if they hope to do well in the next elections, need to run on an agenda. They just last week finally agreed on a massive reform package they were hoping to run on. But the reform package has not been implemented, requires a government, it requires votes in parliament. So I think it is the agenda and it is the need to run on to be prepared for the next elections that forces this government together and that actually provides an incentive for both sides to collaborate. Now, whether this lasts in the long term and Austria will serve out the remainder of the complete term, I'm not so sure. It also depends on the dynamics now between the new chancellor and Kurz as the party leader. It depends on whether Kurz will exact revenge, given that he probably blames the Greens for forcing him out. So all this is uncertain, but I don't think this will happen tomorrow, but this may happen next year. And we don't know what else the police will leak.
All right, I would just want to open this up more broadly and take it to another strand. What does this resignation mean now for his anti-migration policies, his anti-Muslim policies? I'll put that question to you, Judith, first of all.
Well, I think it will continue because Alexander Schallenberg, who is Chancellor now, will follow the same path, and as well as the foreign minister. So it will continue in the way Sebastian Kurz told it.
Okay. Would you agree with that, Reinhard, that his anti-Islam and anti-migration policies will continue in the same way?
I have no reason to doubt that it will continue. The current Chancellor, Schallenberg, has been an executor of the will of Mr. Kurz, and they have a standing agreement between the two parties, and that agreement is still valid. So I don't see any reason for them to change it, and that has proved positive for the Conservatives in attracting voters from the far right. So why would they change it?
Klauss, what happens now in Europe? He wasn't alone, Sebastian Kurz, in his anti-Muslim views and anti-migration views. And now we have a Europe without Angela Merkel. So, Klauss, what happens to these big issues?
Well, as you all know, the EU Commission, in a most bizarre move, shifted Turkey from one directorate to the other, which is called near B, which is hilarious, almost singling out as you reported as well, asking about what is the candidate status after all. Now Angela Merkel on her farewell tour, of course, stopping over in Ankara. I still haven't lost my 1% optimistic view. Maybe she can still push through visa liberalization for Turkey up to a certain extent. But I fully agree with you. The picture is not changing because Herr Kurz is no longer in office. His successors will not automatically change and say, we want Turkey in the EU. Whatever was said the last decades was wrong. As my dear colleague just said, the conservatives are going to vote catching in far right territory in order to go back to a majority. They will not appease those who have a more modest, logic, multicultural, multi-faith opinion. Unfortunately, Maldecev, as we would say here, I do not see it extremely optimistic that Austrian foreign policy is going to change in the near future. I would love to see it. Austria was the hub of diplomacy, United Nations, East, West, North, South. I'm so sad to see basically all this has gone down the drains. It would be absolutely marvelous to have it reversed. Will it happen? I don't know.
Reinhard, what are your thoughts on Klaus's comments there?
Yeah, I would agree with him. I mean, number one, Kurz had a big impact in Germany. He was a rock star among the German conservatives. And I think now the German conservatives are looking for a new leader. And the sense is that the Conservative Party may move to the right, or at least move more from the center towards the right. And I think the Kurz model is still a temptation, perhaps a Kurz without the flaws. So the rock star quality, the youth, the dynamism minus the hubris. I think that may be something that's still a template that would be very tempting for a lot of German conservatives, especially should they go into opposition and need to reorganize themselves. So I think the legacy of Kurz will continue in that sense. I think other European conservatives will also look to Kurz as a lodestar in some sense.
Judith, I see you nodding there. The legacy of Sebastian Kurz for Austrian and for European politics.
Well, it's true that he has named a rock star by US ambassador, and it's also true that Austria is waiting for a new chancellor in Germany, and we don't know what will happen in Germany. Let's see what happens, in fact. And for the rest, let's wait. We cannot say anything currently. But we have to wait what the judges say.
You're optimistic, Judith, that he will come back, Sebastian Kurz,
yes,
for a third time. And
of course.
Remind us why.
Well, he was a very good politician. I cannot say more than that. He was accepted worldwide. He made Austria popular in other countries, and that's very diplomatic. And he was, in fact, the diplomat number one, I would say. But
if you were to write another book about Sebastian Kurz, what would it focus on, given what you've seen in his chancellorship?
Maybe something about how he sees Europe in the next years. That could be very interesting, because Europe currently is a little bit in a not so funny mood, and we need a little bit of pop-up in Europe. That's what I would write.
And just on that point, to you, Reinhard, and also to Klaus, does the EU have to look at its leaders and confront the corruption issues that many leaders have been facing?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think not all countries are equally corrupt, and not all politicians are equally corrupt, and we have to be very careful sort of paint with a really broad brush. For example, I mean, the legacy of Mrs. Merkel was mentioned, that there's very little of that. And I think when we look at the Austrian quality, the Austrian case, youthfulness and the fact that all these people implicated were very young, may also make us pause when we think about anointing very young people, very little experience in their lives, and if they are too successful early on, and that may put brakes on the aspirations of young politicians in other countries, perhaps.
And was he too young to go into politics? And
No.
no, you did. Why not? I mean,
No, I say no because thank God for the first time there was a young man who became a politician and not one of these 60-year-old whatever. I mean, I have nothing against people who are 60 years old, but it was something very special. A young man dedicated to politics and interested in the world and in the people. And that made Sebastian Kurz, I'm sorry to say that.
indeed.
For those who don't...
It's still incredible that, you know, he was only, now he's 36 and he's done...
35.
35. Thank you for correcting my maths.
And he will become a dad now in December, so for the first time.
Okay, thank you so much to all our guests, and we'll be keeping a very close eye on what happens in Austrian politics. Judith Grohmann, Reinhard Heinisch and Klaus Jurgens. Thank you so much for your comments and analysis and your time. And to you, our audience, thank you for watching. See you next time on The Newsmakers. Bye-bye.